Hi, I want to talk to you today about a couple of teams that I've been working with over the last 12 months. One, Scrumdiddlyumptious, just so Jessie knows how to pronounce it, and the Killjoys. And I'm going to talk you through the journey that we had about agile mindset, culture, and leadership. This is me. This is up on our blog straight away. It's also up on SlideShare, and I'll show this at the end in case you want to get those details. And I believe it's also available through the app. You should be able to see it as well. Okay, so we were dealing with a large-scale agile transformation across a really big enterprise. Large program of work, lots of branches working together. And the branch that I was working in had the executive support of that branch head to move to Agile. They were on board with that, which was great. But it was a huge cultural change for the organisation. There was lots of resistance. We had cross-functional teams, but even worse than that, the developers were in cross-functional, different silos. So you had developers, but different speciality of development. Most of our team members had no Agile experience. We didn't have training budget to put everyone on big training courses either. So we had to build our own. We had to build our own Scrum Masters, build our own product owners and so forth. But we had to get those from within the organisation. This was our journey, and as you can see, we started this back in July 2016, and we're still not there. We still have a ways to go. So I'm just going to talk about our journey so far and where we've come from and where we hope to get to eventually. We started with one team as a pilot to just see how this Agile thing would work for this particular branch. We had an experienced Agile coach with us. We worked with the director to actually hand-pick the team. We wanted a really gun team that was going to make this work because it was the pilot. We wanted it to be really successful. We got a mix of that design, build, and test skills within that team. We started with the basics. We just started with Scrum. Within the organisation, they'd done a lot of different Agile starts and some of them not so successful. So we wanted to get back to basics. We started with Scrum. We stressed incremental learning. We also trained the team. We developed their backlog. And then we got them started on their first sprint within 2 weeks. Oh, my battery, Matt. Here's Matt, who's going to help me with my battery. Cool. I'll keep going. So what was our approach to Agile? As I said, we're going to start small and start with the basics. So just train that team, choose a product owner, get a Scrum Master, get that backlog and get them started. We do that over 1 to 2 months. Then as they started to build incrementally their knowledge, we'd add more patterns to that. At the 3 to 6 month mark, we were going to stop and, we were going to stop, reflect, inspect, adapt where we were at and see what we needed to do differently next time and look at the branch processes, what we needed to tweak. And then eventually, at about 6 months' time, we were going to scale. We were going to scale from these 1 to 2 teams up to 20 teams within 12 to 18 months. So after that pilot team at the 3 month mark, we brought in a few other teams. So we had Genesis, Phoenix, Mamma Mia. They tell me it wasn't named after me, but I have my suspicions. And we had a build coordination team. Hands up what the build coordination team do. Yeah, not a very imaginative name. They build and coordinate. But one of those teams that we set up at this stage was Scrumdiddlyumptious. It was a newly formed team, same product, same setup that we did for the Killjoys, that first pilot team. But this team in particular really picked it up and just ran with it. They were learning really quickly. They were striving for knowledge. They just couldn't get enough. They loved it. They embraced the opportunity. They did a lot of innovation. In fact, Scrumdiddlyumptious, on their first sprint review, because they were in a different location to where I was at the time, they actually videoed their sprint review for me and made a little iVideo that they sent me for a 3-minute summary of what they did. I mean, this was a team that was really, really keen. So different. So at about that 6 month mark, we were about, I don't think my pointer's going to work, but we were about here. We started to notice some differences, particularly in the Killjoys. Cracks started to appear in what we were doing. The newer teams were really having fun. You could really tell there was lots of energy on the floor, lots of talking. We had smart boards. They were all around their smart boards for their stand-ups and just really having a good time. They were sharing experiences. They really were self-organising, self-managing teams. They were just keen to learn more, which was fantastic. But the Killjoys were less enthusiastic and they were really stagnating, in our opinion. Originally, we'd set up, because we needed to find Scrum Masters, their manager was really keen to be the Scrum Master, so he became the Scrum Master. But we found that over time, he went back into that old habit of assigning work to the team and really was the team manager. So he would find stories that would fit the mix of skills for the people in his team. That was what he was doing. He was still thinking in those functional silos. He wasn't looking at the capabilities and how we could mix that and share the knowledge and skills across the team. They were getting stuff done, but there was no collaboration, and they went through forming and storming cycles continuously. There was a lot of infighting. A lot of the team members, there were some junior team members, there were some senior team members. The senior team members wouldn't listen to the junior team members and all that sort of thing. So when we look at the Tuckman stages of development, they really didn't get out of that forming, storming cycle. They stayed there for the 6 to 12 months. Well, 6 months mark this was. So we thought at that point, look, did we miss something? Why is this happening to the Killjoys? They were our first team. They were meant to be really important. And we thought, what's in a name? And then we realised it's actually really important how they name themselves, because the team name has an impact on the team itself, but also other teams they interact with. Your name that you give yourself as a team, and hopefully a lot of you allow teams to come up with their own name, it gives them the first impression that they're trying to create of what they do and what they're about, what their values are. Sometimes it's a function that they fulfill, like the build coordination team. That was fairly obvious. But it gives the team an identity. It helps the team members to understand what they're doing, what they're accountable for. And it's a team bonding as well. We found friendly competition as well. Some of our team members have quite competitive names. So I did at the time when the Killjoys came up with the name, I thought it was a bit of a funny name. And I asked them, and they told me that it came from the Kilroy was here, which is the first meme that was around before the internet. And this is about, you know, the Anzacs storming the troops and American soldiers, and to show that they'd taken that ridge and that they were there, they'd put this Kilroy symbol up. It was something that was very common in the World War. Had a few World War buffs in my team at the time, so I thought it was a funny name, but I thought, well, if that's what it means to them, go with it, because I don't veto names. I mean, I had a team who didn't want to do Agile who called themselves Waterfalls. Their avatars were Niagara Falls and all that sort of thing, but I thought, you know, if I could cope with Waterfalls, I could probably cope with Kilroys. The Killjoys. But what I found out for that pilot team was being chosen as that first pilot team to be Agile wasn't a good thing to them. They felt they'd been singled out because it wasn't popular in that branch to be Agile. The organisation had had mixed success, as I had mentioned, so they sort of saw it as a bit of a punishment. I mean, why'd you pick me for the Agile team? Like, what did I do wrong? Why'd you pick me? So they also, when they were in the Agile team, all their colleagues around them, because they were the only team, were saying to them, oh, you're those post-it note people, so you must be Agile. And they were quite cynical about them. So they were just going through the motions. They were doing Agile, but their heart and soul just wasn't in it. When I talked to Jessie from the team, I had a coffee with her at that 6-month mark and drilled down into the Killjoys. She said, well, yeah, the Kilroy thing was there as a bit of a joke, but really we named ourselves because you are killing our joy by making us do this. And that's when we thought, okay, we've got a problem here. So what was going on? We had the executive on board, but we didn't have the middle management on board. The team leaders were really nervous. They didn't know where they fitted in, how this Agile thing was going to work, was I going to lose my job? So when things got tough, they went back into their old habits. Agile was seen as a team thing. It's just a fad, we can just ride it out, and then we'll be okay when they stop all this Agile silliness, was kind of the attitude the middle managers had. I had a lot of them come up to me and say, look, Mia, this Agile thing, yeah, look, sounds really good in theory, but it won't work in the real world. So a lot of cynicism out there. So it was a time to reboot because we were about to roll out another 6 teams. So we'd learnt a lot at this Inspect Adaptation point. We had a workshop and we found some really big issues. We talked about doing Agile, which is what the Killjoys were doing, versus doing and being Agile, which is what Scrum Diddlyumptious were doing. We talked about the leadership because the leadership wasn't Agile. They saw it as a team thing, wasn't something that they had to do. And there were cultural barriers. They just really weren't ready for this change. And more importantly, they had no desire to change. Without desire, you're not going to get any behavioural change. So we thought we need to look at this thing from a cultural point of view rather than just a process and point of view. And when you look at the State of the Agile report that comes out every year, consistently you're going to see culture in there. This is from the 2016, but also in 2017, very similar results. Culture at odds with the core Agile mindset consistently comes through. That lack of management support, but then again, lack of support for cultural transition. So we looked at those aspects and actually applied them to the team that we were working with. And this is our scorecard. So you can see that we just didn't have the directors supporting us. That was a big red mark. We had some people looking, promoting the team would have time to learn and permission to learn, but we really didn't have a lot of people talking about Scrum Master's role as a true role for the Scrum Master. They saw it was, well, if they only do 15 minutes of stand-up, and then the sprint planning's about 2 hours, and then the sprint review's another 2 to 4 hours in the retrospective, that means that they're only really working about 8 hours a week. So I could probably put them on 4 teams, couldn't I? So these were the sort of discussions that we were having. So they really didn't understand the Scrum roles and responsibilities. We also looked at the culture at odds with our Agile mindset. We were doing some things right, as you can see, but there were a lot of things that we had a huge road ahead of us to get that cultural buy-in. And it's probably what you see in your organisations as well, that whole iceberg of culture that can really sink or swim your Agile transformation. It's the difference between the way we get things done around here to the way the things actually work. So drilling down into those hidden things about values, norms, the traditions around here will really understand the culture that's really in your organisation as opposed to what you see on the surface. And that's because change is hard. And when we think about the Kubler-Ross change curve, which most of you are probably familiar with more from a grief point of view, but if you're applying it to a change curve and to teams in particular, you can see that when teams are starting something new or they're building up a new competency, they do go through that shock, denial, frustration when things don't work. For our Killjoys, they got down to that low point and couldn't find out how to get out of there. But teams, when they start to incrementally build their experience and they start to experiment and those experiments start to work, you'll see that they do actually start to learn. And it takes time. So we would tell our teams that, it is a 3 to 6 month journey to just even feel that you're getting there. And it's a much longer journey for this whole branch to get there. Because they'll go from, oh my God, this is easy, it's just common sense, to this is hard, to then cherry picking. Oh, can't we just do the bits that work for us? To then really understanding, actually, this is pretty good and I can really use this, to, oh my God, it is just common sense. And it's straightforward. Collaborate, deliver, reflect, improve. And that's all about that appetite for change and creating that desire. So we had awareness at some level, but we really hadn't worked much on getting the desire of the people to change within the teams. And because we had no desire to change, we couldn't build on that knowledge, get them to behave differently, and reinforce that behaviour. So we looked at the ADCAR model to see what we needed to do to actually help us change that behaviour and reinforce that good behaviour we were seeing. We looked at change models like Kotter's stages of models, and probably what we'd missed, particularly in the beginning, is that sense of urgency and building that guiding coalition team. So we got together with our management team to sort of look at that. We had a workshop with the directors and the middle managers to kind of see What do we need to do to make this Agile transformation happen? We're about to roll it out to a much bigger program of work. So we stressed that it was an organisational-wide initiative. It wasn't just this branch that was doing it. It was actually something that the whole organisation was embracing. It had come from the CEO as well as the CIO. We needed to change old ways of working, our capability and functional silos, and otherwise we wouldn't be able to deliver the agenda that we had. There was a lot of big program of work from a digital transformation that we needed to do as a body. We needed 60 teams to actually deliver this digital transformation over 2 to 3 years. So the executive urged the directors to get on board and work out for themselves how they're going to make this happen within their team. So put it very much back to the directors. In fact, there was a crucial point in that particular workshop where the branch head basically said, look, I know a lot of you know that I'm retiring in 12 months and you think you can ride this out. I'm not going to actually retire until you're agile. And then they got a bit scared. So she said, look, there will be challenges. And when the organisation isn't agile yet, but it's okay, we're going to give you support, we're going to work it through together. And she set up, most importantly, that guiding coalition for the coaches and teams to work with. This was the inputs to the transition plan that we went through. So we talked about the benefits of being agile, particularly being able to manage our changing priorities, increasing team productivity, and giving them the visibility at program level that they didn't at this point in time have. But also about, predictability, reduced project costs, faster delivery, and so forth. Because essentially this is the what's in it for them. We said that it'll increase innovation, it'll improve our process, it'll improve collaboration across the program, we'll create a learning culture. So we're very much talking about culture, transparency, and more importantly for a big organisation, being able to decrease their risk. And culture was seen as an enabler for us of that. So we looked very much at sort of the symbols, behaviours, attitudes, rituals, and the values that were at the heart of that. And we got them all together and we did what we call a futurespective. Anyone done a futurespective with their teams? Yeah. It's really quite effective when you're trying to sort of vision where you might be. So we asked the directors and managers to sort of look forward 12 months ahead and tell us what was sort of attitudes, culture and behaviour that they'd like to see and build in this program of work. And then once we understood that, what enablers do we need from a people, process, technology point of view to make that happen? So the question we asked was, what does awesome look like? And let's define awesome. We talked about this not being just about project management, which was obviously where we'd come from, but being focused on product and product management through that whole cycle, having those feedbacks from clients. Because our traditional roles had to change. So we talked about roles and responsibilities and how there wasn't always a one-to-one relationship. In fact, one of my colleagues who's got a PMI background, very much in project management space, when he first moved into the Agile program of work, he was trying to work out, okay, so a Scrum Master is this and a Product Owner is this. He was trying to do a one-to-one correlation between the old roles and the new roles. After a couple of days, he actually came to my colleague Matt and said, there is no correlation, is there? And we went, yeah, that's right. Everyone had a role. We made sure everybody in the organisation knew this wasn't about decreasing the workforce. You all have a role. It's just going to be a little bit different to what you were doing yesterday. Your role and your responsibilities will change, but you still have a job. You still have a role. It's just going to be different. So this was the structure that we had. As you can see, lots of teams, big organisation, lots of shared services. But the important thing on the side was we realised because we were breaking up those capability silos, we needed to support those. So we had communities of practices that we needed to set up to do that. We still had program management, release management, lots of agile teams. We worked out what the structures of those teams are, like 3 developers, 2 testers, 2 designers, so that everyone kind of understood where we were heading with this. And we looked at the chapters and the communities that we needed to set up to support those teams, because we were pulling away from the developers, for example, their identity as a specialist area. So we needed to make sure we still had those chapters so they could hone their specialist skills, because that was important. We needed them to keep developing their skills. but we also gave them a community of practice that was across the branch, not just within their team. And in our roadmap, more importantly, that we put together, rather than it being very activity-based, we started to think about some of those cultural aspects too. So at this point in time, what symbols, what behaviours do we expect to see? And then as we move forward, we're adding patterns. You know, what are the attitudes? What are the rituals we're seeing? So we built upon that, but very importantly, looked at the cultural aspects, not just the activities that we were doing. We did a roadshow so that we could communicate and make sure everyone was aware of it so that we could build that desire to change. So we talked about what's changing, why is it changing, who needs to be involved, and how are we going to do this. We also developed for the team an implementation guide at team level so that they had a sort of an accompaniment to that roadmap of, well, what does that mean for me at team level? Because that high-level plan, that sounds good, but I don't really understand how my role's changing and I don't understand how this works for me. So we made sure that we had that because we knew that we needed to have 18 cross-functional teams up and running within 6 months. So we needed to look at, from that alignment, that practice of what we do and deliver, how we act, and how we think. We needed that alignment. And that's where sort of doing Agile and being Agile really came to play. Because when we started with the Killjoys, we actually created a team of champions. We picked the best of the best from the different teams that we had to choose from. But we ended up finding out that was really an anti-pattern. With the Killjoys, it was actually a champion team. They came together, worked together. They weren't exactly, you know, the guns, but they certainly came together as a team and were a champion team. Because when you're trying to get a group to move in a certain direction together, you actually need people that are willing to adopt new skills and learn new things. And that's certainly what Scrumdiddlyumptious were. They were committed to the goals of the team above their individual goals, collaborating internally and externally, building team relationships. They were really doing Agile, so they were doing all the basics of Scrum and what we're asking to do, but they were also being Agile. And I think that was the critical difference. Because if we think about doing Agile and being Agile, both are really important. The doing of the Agile is our left brain, our logical part. So the logic gives us good things. It gives us focus. It gives us a look at what waste and flow we've got in it. It's that inspect, adapt, that empiricism, that delivery mindset. So very, very important. Because as we know with Agile, there's numerous frameworks out there that we could use and lots of practices. So doing Agile, that's what we're doing. But in being Agile, we also need to engage our right brain, which is our emotional, our social side. And this is where the other values come in of respect, openness, courage, commitment, transparency, collaboration, and trust. They're the things that we need for our Agile transformations to work. And that's built upon the 4 values from the Agile Manifesto and the 12 principles. All of you would be familiar with the manifesto. Obviously, it's been shown a couple of times today. But that individual and interactions, working products, because a lot of our teams weren't necessarily software teams. Some of them were management teams or dealing with policy. So we talked about products instead, collaboration and responding to change. And of course, the 12 principles were very important, and we made sure that everybody visually had these around as our symbols of what we're about. Because it really is about that empiricism and the pillars that are built on for Scrum. So inspection, adaptation, transparency, and that basis of trust, that respect for people within our organisation. It was interesting because at our PI planning a couple of weeks ago, someone said to me, when you think about Agile, what one word describes that for you? And for me, that word was collaboration, because I really think that it's about collaboration, not just passive coordination of activities between teams, particularly when you're at scale. That's why I love the Scrum values that have come out, because it's got that mix of right brain and left brain, that courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. And because Patricia's in the room from scrum.org, you missed a marketing opportunity to use the force. F-O-R-C-C, that's how I remember it. So if you can't remember the values, just think of use the force. Something needed to be E in one of those C's, but yeah, that's the easiest way to remember courage, focus, openness, respect, courage, and commitment. And they're the sort of values that we kept coming back to, because we really felt that if our behaviours were true to those values, the principles from the manifesto and so forth, we were on the right track. Because to change the behaviour, we really needed different leaders. So the killjoys, the directors, were still assigning work. Scrumdiddlyumptious, director-led from the back of the room. Alex, the particular leader of that team, you wouldn't have even known he was the manager in the room. He's just got there, let the team run with it. They were self-empowered, they were self-managing. And that's because it's about leadership. So Ken, who we heard this morning in the keynote, he says the role of management changes from telling people what to do to leading and helping everyone to do their best to achieve goals. And I really, really love that quote. Because these are the agile organisational traits that we're looking for and we were looking for. Continuously seeking to improve, even when they are successful. So teams don't rest on their laurel, they're always trying to look at how do I get better, how do I improve? Alignment and clarity around mission and vision and values, embracing failure as a learning opportunity, have a strong purpose, rapid decision making happens not just during a crisis. If there's a crisis, yeah, sure, we can make a decision quickly, but we want that sort of rapid decision making every day and having teams empowered to make those decisions. And a strong ability to execute, high levels of accountability, customer-centric. And as we know, when we're dealing with some of the programs that we're dealing with, a lot of the times our requirements are far from agreement and our technology is far from certain. So the sweet spot for Scrum is really in that complex environment where there's more that's unknown than what is known. So why, from a leadership perspective, given that that's the characteristics of our environment, that it's not predictable, there's an answer needed, do we apply that old command and control leadership style to it? We obviously need to do something differently. And get that mindset and behavioural shift of management from predictive management, where they've got long-term, detailed plans, assigning and controlling the work, keeping on schedule, driven by meetings and reports, to really looking at that empirical management, which is about goals, vision, direction. It's about fostering the environment, removing those impediments, going to the sprint reviews, doing that Gemba, going to where the teams are and finding out what the issues are. Share incremental feedback, managing for value. And Dan Pink's talk, you would have seen the TEDx talk about autonomy, mastery and purpose. Really honing that so that the teams really understand why we're doing this, what they can actually do, and giving them that sense in their communities and chapters of really honing their skills and getting better and continuously improving. Because the managers are the keys to success, and that's probably what we missed in the beginning. We were focused on the teams and getting them doing good Scrum. We probably didn't bring the managers along in that journey at the beginning. Luckily, we picked it up at the 3 to 6 month mark, but we needed them to exemplify the transformational change, embrace that agile mindset, lead by example. It wasn't just a team thing. We actually wanted our managers and leaders to be a Scrum team as well. Context switching, centralise, big problems to solve, but don't solve them for the team. Give them to the teams to solve those problems. As an Australian in New Zealand, hopefully I'm not bringing up some words, but sweeping the sheds. Does anyone know what that means? It's a very New Zealand term. If you're a rugby buff like myself, you understand it. What this sweeping the sheds is about is leading by example, exemplifying that mindset. The Rugby World Cup in 2007, I was lucky enough to go to France. New Zealand, by far in the lead up to that, the All Blacks were the most awesome team. They were meant to come to France and win that hands down. As those of you that are rugby people know, New Zealand didn't win. In fact, they got knocked out in the quarterfinals by France. It was devastating. Australia got knocked out as well in the quarterfinals, so it's okay. And, I know that was a time of mourning for New Zealanders. But what happened a couple of months later was the New Zealand All Black team were playing the Lions over in England. And one of the journalists came back into the sheds, into the locker room, to sort of see, hey, see if there's anyone around. And he saw 2 of the All Blacks cleaning the locker room. And it wasn't that someone had stayed back to clean the locker room that was the thing that was most astounding. It was who was cleaning that locker room. Any guesses? Yeah, Richie McCaw, the captain, and Dan Carter, one of the best All Blacks that they've ever been, were cleaning those sheds, sweeping the sheds. And when the journalist asked him about it, they said, well, we lead by example. If we expect the team to clean up, then we need to clean up. And that's when they thought, let's forget the arrogance of what happened and brought our downfall in 2007. We need to lead by example. We need to lead first. And that's how, I guess, the All Blacks are so awesome today, is because they've always had that leaders first attitude. Because they had that hiccup in 2007 and they never wanted that to happen again. So sweeping the sheds is something that's really important. Leaders need to do it. They need to exemplify the behaviour as well. So we talked to the leaders about how Agile actually can make your life a lot easier. Increase understanding of the bigger picture for your teams. Keeps them better tabs on what's happening, and you can stay organised. And so rather than being manager-led, be self-managing, self-designing, self-directing. Much better for the teams. Constraints can be set by the organisation, so it wasn't a free-for-all. We made sure that the teams did understand what the boundaries were for the decision-making, so that we had those accountabilities. And we needed that for self-organisation to truly be effective. So we made the management team, the leadership team, a Scrum team as well. The leadership team would also have their Scrum of Scrums. Our future perspective, we got the top 10 priorities that the team needed to work on, and we set a plan. They had a Scrum stand up every day. They had their priorities set, and they worked through that backlog over the next 3 to 6 months. We had that cross-functional team, and they had a 4-week sprint cycle. We've just hit the 12-month mark not that long ago. We now have 20 Agile teams and 2 Agile release trains, but we've got 70% of the branches now Agile. So that's a huge cultural shift for the organisation now. We've got good momentum, but obviously we know there's more work to be done. So, in conclusion, back to Ken again. Scrum is hard and disruptive. We found that out. We made some mistakes. Because what we're doing in Scrum, iteratively and incremental development, is much harder. So what we're doing in Waterfall, we're doing in smaller cycles. So it's much harder. It really needs to be worked out over time. So the lessons learned for us was Agile transformation requires the teams and the enterprise to think really, really differently. It's a huge cultural change, not a technology change. And the cultural change was really difficult. Key blockers were the middle managers, so we really needed to concentrate on them and get them on board first, because really they had the most to lose in this scenario. We needed to bring them on the journey. We needed all teams to be Scrum teams, not just a team thing. It was something the leaders did as well, the managers did as well. And to change behaviour, we needed to adopt that Agile mindset and live those values and live those principles. Because we had to move to not just doing Agile, we also needed to be Agile as well if we were going to embody the principles. So here's my top 10 tips for starting your Agile transformation. You need executive and management support. Start small, incremental, build that change. You need behavioural change or it won't happen. Patience, because it's going to take time. We know we're on a 2 to 3 year journey here. We started with the basics, we started with Scrum, and we've built on patterns and frameworks on top of that. We still work to the organisation's standards. We're consistent with our processes and practices. We get experienced Agile practitioners to help us where we can. Agile mindset across the whole of the branch. User-centred to deliver products, not just projects. Think value for the users over priority, and break down those collaboration those silos that we had. And that's the end. Thank you.